From entering college, I was fairly clear that I ultimately wanted to pursue studies to become a barrister, and then more likely than not, but not definitively, to practice at the bar. For me, I was very attracted to the idea of the oral advocacy, which is at the core of a barrister's job. And it was in stark contrast, I suppose, to the image that we have of the life of a solicitor who might be spending his or her days cooped up in an office, as opposed to at the cut and thrust of fighting for justice in the halls of justice. The reality is actually somewhat different, but it was the thing that pulled me towards the bar, and as a result pulled me towards King's Inns, because King's Inns is the only place in Ireland, or the Republic of Ireland, where you can train to become a barrister. And I have to say that the year I spent here was, without a doubt, one of the most enjoyable years that I spent in education. There are a number of things that I would say about it. The first is that you have a choice, and you're either aware of this already or you'll be made aware of it this evening, that you can study 1 year full-time to take the Barrister-at-Law degree, or 2 years on a part-time basis. And I spent 1 year full-time at King's Inns. And I would say that it was, of the years that I spent as a student, without question, the one where I was best able to strike the balance between work and, I suppose, play. There were, when I look back, some years when I worked very hard as a student and seemed to do nothing else, and there are other years where I can recall doing almost absolutely nothing. But at King's Inns, it was very easy to get that balance right. And that was because, in a sense, the lines between work and, I can't continue to call it play, but certainly your extracurricular life or your community were somewhat blurred. They crossed over one into the other at times. A great attraction of the teaching method that applies at King's Inns is that you're taught in groups of about 16. It's very interactive. There are a lot of things that you do, like, for example, engage in mock advocacy or negotiation with your classmates, or consultations with your classmates that you would never have done, I imagine, in your legal studies up to this point. And there are also a great deal of extracurricular opportunities open to students at King's Inns, an extraordinary amount really, that are there simply to be grabbed. When I was a student at King's Inns, some students went to the Netherlands or to the United States to engage in moot court competitions. Other students went to Australia to take part in a negotiation competition. There are a range of debating competitions as well. And King's Inns is very proactive in supporting its students in all of these extracurricular activities, because it recognises the importance of developing the kind of skills that you do outside your studies in the strict sense of the syllabus in your day-to-day practice as a barrister. You will hear a lot more tonight, I imagine, about the mechanics of the course, so rather than dwell on that, I'm just going to speak very briefly also about life as a barrister and my experience. I'm in my 4th year of practice, so I can only give really a flavour of what it's like, because the experience is very different dependent on the stage of your career that you're at. But as for me, it will be for all of you the very first stage that you'll encounter, and so I suppose it might be of interest from that perspective. First of all, the bar is quite different to what I expected it to be. Now, that's not to say it's better or worse, but it's different in 2 respects. It's a much more specialised profession than I realised, or expected it to be, I should say. And that's something to bear in mind when you're dealing with something which is another day's work entirely to this, which is your choice of master. But it's just something I would suggest you think about in due course, or you be aware of. The second is, and this is important, I think, the focus on oral advocacy is less than you might imagine, unless you are practicing as a criminal barrister. If you practice in what's called, as I imagine you will all know, civil law, which is really anything other than crime, an awful lot of your work will be paperwork based, but you will still get plenty of opportunities to engage in oral advocacy. But it's certainly not, perhaps I was naive and other people are far better informed, but there is less of the cut and thrust of oral advocacy than I thought, and when there is, you spend an awful lot of time generally preparing for it. Other times you may not spend as much time as you should, but generally you spend an awful lot of time in preparation. Another thing about the bar, and this is something that I suppose is obvious if you know it, but was new to me as well, is how much I enjoyed being self-employed and the benefits that come from that, and the way you can choose, I suppose. You have a certain amount of autonomy over the way that you live your life. A lot of people talk about the hardship of the bar and how difficult it is to establish yourself. There's no doubt there is an element of truth in that. There's a strong element of truth in it. But there are also advantages too with being self-employed, not being tied down by the strictures of a firm or a strict structure of employment. As I say, you have an awful lot of autonomy, and that can be very liberating. There are times when you can work 24/7 on your practice at the bar, and there are other times when, if you have other things to pursue, you can simply walk away and pursue those other avenues. It is a terrific course, and I really say that truthfully. It's very well taught, it's very enjoyable. It's not like studying law in the classical sense of reading texts. It's invigorating, you're getting constant feedback. It was the only time in my studies in school or beyond school where you were getting constant graded feedback of how you were faring. And that was exceptionally beneficial in terms of preparing for day-to-day practice at the bar, because that is one profession where every single day that you stand up, you are being tested once again. Thank you very much.